Dunedin was a much needed stop. Getting the bilges cleaned up for one thing, after a really wet trip down. There was a lot of water slopping around and the carpets got pretty sticky, wet and diesely with little chance of drying out when constantly on the move. Good to get the job finally done at last. Topping up on diesel and water, got some fresh bread, catching up on sleep. Finally meeting up with Joanna and their fine crew, letting the hair down a bit, pirating a berth on the fisherman's wharf. But we had to be somewhere else. So as soon as the next weather window opened up, we headed out on the next leg. 150 odd nautical mile journey that would take at least 36 hours at a planned speed of 4 knots. Leaving in the evening, timed with the tide, meant we got sped out past Taranto Head at good speed and down the coast past Cape Saunders on sunset for a night passage, down towards Nugget Point at daybreak, and then further down still the coast before peeling away across the notorious Foveaux Strait overnight, with the idea of trying to get there at dawn, Stewart Island at dawn. Pete Mill offered to jump ship from Joanna and keep me company, and that was a great help after my first very long solo stretches down the east coast of the South Island. First dawn was clear and sunny, more time to try and catch some photos and videos of the albatrosses, or mollyhawks as they're commonly called. Mid-morning the wind dropped a bit and then we tacked backwards and forwards, never really getting past Nugget Point before we gave up and motored a bit. We lost sight of Joanna early on the first night, and they headed further offshore than us, trying to look for the stronger winds, but their mast and sails appeared again mid-afternoon. A glassy sea at sunset marked a wind change, and the two yachts came together to touch base before the overnight to Stewart Island. To begin with, we tried to keep within sight of each other during the crossing, but in the dark that became rather hazardous. The mesmerising navigation lights, judgments of distances deceiving in the blackness, and with Taranto sailing and Joanna motoring meant our speeds weren't constant, and the last thing we wanted to do was a collision, so the distance slowly grew between us and we just didn't worry about it. Well, once again, overnight, I pretty much left things to the night watchman Pete, motor sailing in squally rain most of the night. The engine was driven the hardest ever in the small hours to make a reasonable way against a tidal stream in the vicinity of Ruapuki Island, and went south of Native Island into Patterson Inlet. And we picked up a mooring buoy amongst the other vessels in the Faith, Hope and Charity Island group, No sign of Joanna though. Turns out they'd changed course during the night for Port Adventure. We moved moorings and later Joanna turned up and rafted up with us on it. The next day, with the rest of the Mapua Boat Club flotilla not due for another couple of days, we sailed past another huge cruise ship, this time anchored in Patterson Inlet. Around the corner to Oban and Half Moon Bay we're going. A pub, the South Seas Hotel, a 4-square supermarket, and showers at our backpackers were welcome diversions. Super friendly locals that cemented our extremely warm welcome to these remote islands in the Southern Ocean. And then we sailed southeast down to the secluded and aptly named Port Adventure, sneaking up the narrow entrance of Oyster Cove on the northwestern side for shelter, and awaited the arrival early the next morning of our complete ragtag flotilla. There was the yachts Taranto, Joanna, Endricht, and a couple of launches, Christina and Jazeera, all rafted up together in a remote wilderness, having all safely navigated the South Island's east coast, so it was quite the celebration. Now all we had to do was wait for an opportunity to skip back across Foveaux Strait to Fiordland, which was no mean feat. It took a week or more for the powerful westerlies to relent and eventually give us our opportunity to pounce. Many things happened in the week. There was a lot of fishing, hunting, power feasts, listening to the sounds of wild kiwis in the bush at night, but the biggest event for Taranto was a harrowing experience in mountainous seas.
Oh, and you're somebody else's servant all the time, you know.
Oh, you got to work on Saturdays and Sundays.
A decision was made by the yachts to try a different approach, sailing around the East Cape of Stewart Island, down the east coast to the islands of a safe harbour of Port Pegasus in the southeastern corner. And then by going around the bottom tip of the island and with the prevailing westerlies, we could then theoretically at least get blown straight up on a port tack all the way to Fiordland. Taranto and I sailed around East Cape of Stewart Island confidently despite the rather dreadful forecast, because we were on the lee side of the main island and Joanna was keeping company, and but then I saw the waves and swell surging over Breaksea Islands past Shelter Point, and I considered their names. It looked big, but Joanna was surging on. The plan was to reach Lord's River, the longest internal waterway into Stewart Island. So not just shelter in the narrow and shallow upper reaches, but quite good hunting grounds for the boys with firearms. Heading out over the top of the growing swells, it looked like an achievable goal. The idea was to tack out to the southeast far enough to tack back and into the arm. It was like two tack wonder. I was carrying a reefed main and half the furling foresail, and we were zooming, rising up over the tops of the 4 to 5 metre swells. I could see Joanna occasionally before one or another of us disappeared into the deep trenches. We began dropping off the crests of the big swells and blown over by a 35-40 knot gusts up on top of them. But I was in control despite all of this, and then we fell off the top of a big swell, and then were blown over by one of the gusts, and the port rail sunk deep into the water, and a wave came down the port side, and for the first time ever came over the cockpit coaming and into the cockpit itself, filling it up. We didn't right up immediately, and the cockpit drains were working, but as Taranto leant over, several litres of seawater lay in the V port seat. Immediately I saw this, that when we dropped off the next swell crest, that water was going to be propelled straight into the main cabin where my bed was, which would be another first. So gee, I wish I'd put the washboards in, and careful attention was paid to the next swell, and I managed to ease the water down the scuppers. But clearly this was a whole new level, and Joanna, I saw, was still out there, which was reassuring. I was going to have to perform a tack, and I was also carrying way too much sail, and that was clear. So the plan was pull in some furler and tack, and that was the plan, and leave the work to my reefed main and a pocket handkerchief. As soon as I released the furler cleat and grabbed the line to haul it in, it was just ripped out of my grasp. That happened in seconds. Full foresail extended and thrashed itself to shreds in a deafening 10-second struggle. As I tacked around, I hauled in the tatters with a superhuman strength, but it was a little bit too late for that sort of stuff. Strangely, I didn't feel any fear. I was just gutted that I'd fucked my foresail. So, first opportunity, I lined up the river on the GPS, and it was 3 or 4 hours away at my present speed on just a reefed main, and I knew it wasn't a cosy entrance either. Common sense said bail out. So I turned tail at the next opportunity back to Breaksea. I hailed Joanna on the handheld VHF in the cockpit, but I got no response. We needed to get back out of the swell to get below to make a call on the main set, which took me an hour. As soon as I raised them, they responded coming back to Port Adventure. So with the wind now pretty much on the nose, barrelling down out of the bays, it was a long journey back on just a reefed main and a folding 2-blade prop with 15 horses. The entrance to Port Adventure was really hard work, with Tier Island on one side and East Point on the other, and there were offlying rocks too numerous for mere glances at a chart plotter, so a safe distance needed to be maintained, meaning really short tacks backwards and forwards, where forward gains were very hard to maintain. The engine was of very little assistance. I was kind of motor sailing half the way, so I was mightily encouraged by the cavalry that was now on my aft horizon. Once finally through the narrow reef to windward and into Port Adventure itself, I was at least in with a chance. The skies were even clearing, and a full rainbow behind me halfway up through the bay was teasing me, surely. Joanna could see I was on the home stretch and left me to it, creeping back into Oyster Cove with my tail between my legs. Ribbons fluttering off the foresail furler was one of life's great downers. I could feel the eyes of the other anchored vessels, and it was heavier than the anchor. Dennis and Warren later came over and helped me get the rags down from the furler before dark, and then I headed away in a sail bag, and that really helped. The next day I dug out the lightweight spare foresail from the forepeak and slid it up the furler tracks, much lighter than I recall, but with sheets attached it might work. Warren helped test it by helping me sail up the coast, back up the coast, to Glory Cove, just off Big Glory Bay for the night. On that journey I quietly noted that the main was also wounded with a 2-foot tear beneath the main reef, so I kept the sail reefed for the entire leg. But come the afternoon and the evening at anchor, I removed the mainsail into the cabin and became a seamstress with a needle with 6 metres of waxed cotton and 2 strips of sticky-backed sail tape and a good pair of spectacles, trying to maintain optimism at the halfway mark. I tested out the new full sail combination by circumnavigating Ulva Island in Patterson Inlet. I sailed past Jazeera as well as she was powering up Patterson Inlet on my way out. Anyway, full circle it was. Back to Oban and Half Moon Bay, waiting for the next opportunity to cross Foveaux Strait to get to Fiordland.